Hey, I'm Decathlon Gamer, and welcome back to Zwift Fitness Journey. Today we continue on with our cycling March Madness. It is still round one. This is part 3 of that, but we're going to get through both of the remaining regions in today's episode. So as I get going for my first ride of the week, in terms of where I'm at, not too bad off. I'm actually feeling pretty good. I had that ride Friday, but it was a recovery ride. I had 2 soccer games this weekend, and I actually got through those fairly well. Even had 2 close games, one just barely losing and one where we barely won. Very tight contest, 2-1, and my wife got the winning goal, by the way. So it was nice. It was very nice. And yeah, with that, let's not delay any further. We've got a simple ride ahead of us. We're going to go ahead and complete another route so we can get some XP and clearly level up, as I'm close to level 7 now. And then we'll just get through the day, get through the ride, and get through 2 regions. Let's get to it.
In the best challenges grouping, we see the first 8 seeds comprised of the 3 Grand Tours and the 5 Monuments. The following 8 seeds are comprised of a number of various other races, including things not on the UCI cycling calendar, but found elsewhere. In the 116 matchup, we have the Tour de France, a version of it containing Mont Ventoux and Alpe d'Huez, against the 16 seed, which is the cyclocross season. Now, in the Tour de France, of course, you have 21 stages. It occasionally dips outside of France, but it definitely covers the entirety of the France in its variations through the years. Mont Ventoux, 16 kilometers, 7.5%. Takes nearly an hour to climb. In 2021, they're going to climb it twice. Alpe d'Huez, 14 kilometers, 8%, better part of an hour. The Alps, the Pyrenees, 7 total mountain ranges are covered. And then, of course, you have stage 21, where you roll into Paris, into the Champs-Élysées, and it is the most prestigious of all races. But will it hold up against the competition? 16 seed cyclocross season, 10 World Cup events, plus a few key events, runs September to February. This is the off-season race that not everybody gets involved in. Of course, most famously, coming from cyclocross to the road, Mathieu van der Poel, Wout van Aert from that category. Cyclocross season is grueling. The weather sucks. The environment sucks. It's really difficult, but the races are short. Easy win for the Tour de France. On to the next round. In our 8-9 matchup, we have Milan-San Remo against Strade Bianche. In Milan-San Remo, it's the longest race on the UCI calendar at 298 kilometers. Mostly flat. There's not a whole lot of undulation on it. Enough so that it is known as the Sprinters Classic. Strade Bianche, very new on the scene, began just in 2007, but has gained prestige very quickly. Known as the gravel race, 60 kilometers on gravel through 11 sectors. It's a rough, tough race, and it has a difficult finishing climb, of course, this year made famous by a Mathieu van der Poel attack over 500 watts that he put out on that final climb, beating out Julian Alaphilippe to the finish, to the victory. Strade Bianche might be relatively young in terms of age, especially compared to a monument like Milan-San Remo. But in terms of difficulty, it easily eclipses Milan-San Remo. So Strade Bianche, on to the next round. In our 5-12 matchup, we have the Tour of Flanders against the Olympics. The Olympics is a little harder to pinpoint as every cycle is a little bit different. Occurring once every 4 years, the Olympics has the time trial and the road race. Men's and women's elite for that. It's a tough one because of the varying opportunities. Of course, it's prestigious to claim as a victory, but some years it's just a sprint. Some years it's much more than that. So with unknown quantities, you have to kind of average that out to what it amounts to. Now, in the Tour of Flanders, you have a cobbled race that might not be the hardest cobble race, but you also have the hardest cobble climb in the Koppenberg. The Koppenberg has famously destroyed riders where so many end up running up the Koppenberg with their bike over their shoulder because it's just too steep and too skinny for that matter. Once one rider struggles and gets in the way, it can block the entire road. That difficult climb alone and difficult cobble climb as well is enough to eclipse anything that the Olympics has to offer in terms of a challenge, especially the fact that you get it year after year, while the Olympics is just one in every 4. Tour of Flanders, on to the next round. The 4:13 matchup brings up Paris-Roubaix against the Taiwan KOM, Mount Wuling. The Taiwan KOM is very, very new on the scene, but it's a 105-kilometer race. There is 11,000 feet of climbing. It absolutely is a challenge. It is arguably the world's toughest climbing challenge that's out there. But it's only 9 editions old. It's very, very young. And Paris-Roubaix is very prestigious. And in its own way, not through the climbing, but through the cobbles that it offers, is an absurdly challenging race. There is no harder race in terms of cobble. And for that, it's Paris-Roubaix on to the next round. 6:11 brings Liège-Bastogne-Liège up against the Ultra Endurance Rides. Non-UCI events, but epic rides, cross-country, cross-continent. Some of them are actual races that take days and days to complete. Liège-Bastogne-Liège is the oldest monument, starting way back in 1892. It is very punchy. It's punchy enough that it can go to climbers, including Primož Roglič winning the last edition. Eddie Merckx has won 5 times. Liège-Bastogne-Liège is definitely not an easy race. It's a tough race, but it is a classic. It is one day. It is one stage. That's it. It stops well short of what the ultra endurance rides offer. They can have much more climbing. They have many more kilometers to cover. And while they might not be held at the same pace as Liège-Bastogne-Liège, the kilometers, it's insane what they do on some of those rides. I know that some of the rides have gone all the way from the highest landlocked part of Alaska way down to the southern tip of South America. Insane distances. For that, it's enough to beat out Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which is certainly a mighty challenge, but not as mighty as the ultra endurance rides. Endurance, on to the next round. In our 3:14 matchup, we have La Vuelta with the Alto de los Machucos up against the extreme downhill mountain bike events. Now, La Vuelta, like the other Grand Tours, 21 stages. The climb of Machucos is very short compared to others. It's only 7.2 kilometers, but it averages nearly 9% and tops out at 26, which is just wild. It's only appeared once in La Vuelta. Regardless, it's a very difficult climb, and La Vuelta at 21 stages is definitely a test of any rider's endurance. In 14th, the extreme downhill mountain bike events, there's roughly 25 major venues that host events across the world. It's a pretty popular thing to do. But the biggest thing about this is it's downhill. Gravity does its thing. You've got to be brave. You've got to handle a bike really well. The conditions are super tough, but it's a downhill race, first and foremost. Now, there are sections where there's a lot of pedaling involved, and it's at a high rate of speed, and you gotta push. There's a reason why it made this list. There's a reason why it earned a seed. It is not easy in any way, shape, or form, but it is nothing compared to a 21-stage race. Vuelta, on to the next round. The 7:10 matchup is Il Lombardia versus the original Tour de France back in 1903. Il Lombardia, known as the Autumn Classic, it's the only one of the 5 to appear in the end of the season. It is a puncher's classic with 2 big climbs just before the finish that is enough to break out the field and separate it and allow the punchers to go free to claim the victory. The original Tour de France, just 6 stages, but each one averaged over 400 kilometers each. There was 2 rest days in between, but the race themselves, instead of taking a third of a day or a quarter of a day, and especially on the equipment that they were using back then, it was an all-day ride. It was insane, the distances that they were covering. It was the ultra endurance ride of the time. And that is enough to beat out Il Lombardia, that, other than a couple punchy climbs at the finish, isn't that hard of a race. The original Tour de France, on to the next round. Wrapping up the group, in our 2:15 matchup, we have the Giro d'Italia with Mount Zoncolan versus the other Giro d'Italia, the Giro Rosa, the feminine version. This is going to be an easy selection, but this is more about the Giro Rosa and bringing highlight that A, the women's sport is up and coming, and it's come a long, long way over the last few decades. B, it needs more attention. It's just starting to get media coverage. C, it also needs more quality. Right now, the only major event where we have 3 Grand Tours on the men's side, the women's side, really just the Giro Rosa. La Tour has a event that is kind of come and gone, and it's been a few stages here. It's been 4 stages. I think the longest they've seen is 6 stages. The Giro Rosa is generally 10 stages. It varies a little bit. They cover about 1,000 kilometers, which is a good distance, but it's nothing compared to what the men are given to take on and tackle each year. The women's sport needs more attention, more support, and tougher tours. Giro Rosa doesn't come close to the Giro d'Italia. Giro d'Italia, on to the next round. We now take a look at the sport's best moments. In the 1:16 matchup, Chris Froome at the Giro d'Italia Stage 19 in 2018 versus the 2012 Presidential Tour of Turkey and Kajsa breakaway victory. That 1 seed, Froome, in 2018, famously goes 80-kilometer solo ride to victory on the stage, and also taking the pink jersey that he will then hang on to and win that Giro d'Italia. In that 16 seed, that 2012 Presidential Tour of Turkey, Kajsa, a rider not of high fame or anything like that, was part of the breakaway on the day and was the last rider surviving that break and actually looked poised to win the stage. So the rare but surprising and exciting breakaway victory was set to occur with 1 kilometer from the finish line and a fairly comfortable lead. He was probably still around 15 to 20 seconds ahead of the pack, who were setting up for their sprint. He comes around the final corner, and the rear tire slips, and he goes down. Nothing bad about it. He hops on the bike super fast and goes to take off, and he had dropped the chain. So he has to quickly hop off and fix his chain and get it back on, and then gets back on the bike and starts pedaling like mad, trying to get to the finish line. Of course, he's been in the breakaway all day long, and he's completely exhausted, and this giant sprint train has formed as the teams line themselves up for that finishing run. He's got a slender lead of just a few seconds, and he's trying to get to the end. And with these lead-out riders and these sprinters coming along, announcers and everyone firmly believes that it's over. There's no way that he's going to hang on. He's going to get swallowed by the sprinters and finish, maybe 10th or 15th or 20th. But he pedals and he pedals and he pushes and he pushes, and aided strongly by the commentary, he hangs on by 3 bike lengths to claim victory. Huge victory for the little guy. It was definitely the minnows claiming that day, but the minnows will not claim this day. Chris Froome's Giro d'Italia stage victory on stage 19 to also claim the jersey is the better of the 2 options here. Froome on to the next round. Our 8-9 matchup sees the Tour of Flanders solo victory by Philippe Gilbert in 2017 against Lance Armstrong's acrobatic save at the Tour de France in 2003, where he rode through the grass and then rejoined with the peloton on the switchback just below. Now, in the Tour of Flanders win, it was an incredible ride that saw a breakaway from a long ways out hang on and take victory. In the case of Armstrong's, it was a super hot day. The tarmac was melting the tires, and Armstrong was riding second in line downhill after a major climb, heading towards finish. The rider at the front lost control while going through a switchback under the heavy braking, under the duress that the tires weren't quite managing under the heat, and went down just in front of Armstrong. Armstrong acrobatically saves his bike and keeps his balance, but it sends him straight off the road. Everybody behind was able to slow down just enough, the next ones in line, and avoid the now sliding off-road first rider in line, and they continue on. Armstrong, going at a massive turn of pace, finds himself in a grass field, downhill still, rapidly going, and just desperately keeping his balance, trying to slow the bike down. Eventually he gets it slowed down enough as the road, which is going switchbacks back and forth, as the road is coming right back to where he is, heading down this hill. He gets it stopped, he hops off the bike, he jumps across ditch on the side of the road, jumps back onto the road, and is getting on his bike and beginning to pedal as the group, as the peloton that's coming quickly downhill goes past, and he gets right in the middle of the group. Normal circumstances, if he had gained something from it, he might have been disqualified, but under those circumstances is allowed to keep that same time as everybody else, as he did not gain anything from cutting the road. And obviously under the circumstances, there was no way of avoiding the crash except in the manner that he did. Armstrong, it saved the race, but he did not win on the day. So on this occasion, the victory goes to, well, the victor of the day, which is Philippe Gilbert with his solo win. On to the next round. The 5:12 matchup sees the 2020 Tour de France Stage 20 time trial victory of Pogačar. Was second in the Tour. Primož Roglič was the leader. Roglič is a good time trialist, as is Pogačar. There shouldn't have been much between the two, but fatigue that late in the race, the signs were beginning to show that Roglič was definitely struggling and that Pogačar was a little bit stronger there at the end of the Tour, and it really showed up in that time trial victory against the number 12 seed, which is Max Bula, on stage 2 of the 1931 edition of the Tour de France, famously coming from behind to claim victory. Now that story is a little more complex. Back in 1931, you had national teams instead of Team Sky or Jumbo Visma, Ducati Quick-Step. You had national teams. You had a French team. You had an Italian team, so on and so forth. But then you also had a few this is like your Conti Pro kind of teams that are other individuals. Max Bula was one of those. And those individuals on certain stages were forced to start 10 minutes later than the primary teams. So Max Bula on stage 2 of that tour, even though it was just a sprint stage, started 10 minutes behind the peloton as an amateur. They caught up, and he managed to win the stage anyway. So famously, and the only time that a non-pro won a stage at the Tour de France. As impressive as it was for an amateur to claim victory, it was just a sprint stage. There was nothing complex about it, and covering 10 minutes on a long stage in the peloton, one of the more famous moments, but still not actually that impressive. Though, hey, amateur getting the win, that's great for the little guy. But in this case, the 2020 drama of claiming the yellow jersey and the stage was far more impressive. So, Pogačar and his victory on to the next round. In the 4:13 matchup, we have Anna van der Breggen claiming both the rainbow double at the World Championships, winning the individual time trial and road race. And the road race won in fine fashion, as she did so on a solo breakaway from I think it was like 35 kilometers out, well before the finish, getting a comfortable victory in the end on that one against Eugene Christophe. Now, this is an interesting story from back in 1913, one of the earliest Tour de France's. During a stage, he broke the fork on the front of his bike. He ended up losing 40 minutes, but he welded it himself. He went to a forge, to a blacksmith. He famously welded the fork back himself to keep going and still being a participant in the Tour. Of course, losing 40 minutes did cost him the race. He had no chance of winning, but he was famously leading the stage at the time that he broke the fork. This one, though, easy victory for Anna van der Breggen. In our 6-11 matchup, we have the battle between Lance Armstrong and Jan Ulrich up Alpe d'Huez, one that you could actually pick from a number of different years, a number of different stages, a number of different opportunities. Those two battled regularly up Alpe d'Huez, versus Tom Boonen's Paris-Roubaix solo victory in 2012. Now, Boonen's, it's impressive. It was solo, it was long-term, and it is always difficult to ride solo in a big race like Paris-Roubaix. But it is also a race that we often see come down to ones and twos late on anyway. Bunch sprints of 3, 4, 5, 6 riders is typical at the finish line. The Armstrong-Ulrich one is going to end up being an easy winner on this. It is going to go on to the next round. Short description is they were among a front trio. They ended up crashing. Armstrong taking longer to recover, needing a new bike. By time he goes to catch up to the front group, who had slowed up a little bit for a little while, but then realizing that he wasn't coming back immediately, they rode on. He, though, gets on the bike and just starts plowing his way through the competition, through the field, through the riders who were behind that front trio, but very much the best climbers. And he rides past one, another, catches the front group. He's with them for a matter of seconds and starts riding on. Ulrich goes with. But then he leaves Ulrich in the dust and ends up with a huge gap. That ended up one of the fastest all-time climbs, including the time lost from the crash. And most of the climb end up being solo along the way. Now, of course, yeah, EPO and all that and times were drastically affected by that, but Jan Ulrich had the majority of the fastest times up Alpe d'Huez. So the fact that he not only caught Ulrich, but slaughtered Ulrich up that climb was quite impressive. Armstrong, Ulrich, on to the next round. The 3:14 matchup sees the 2019 Amstel Gold victory of Mathieu van der Poel against the legend of Abdelkader Zaf. Now, in the Amstel Gold race, van der Poel had attacked too early, ends up dropping back to the peloton with small breakaways up the road ahead of it. Alaphilippe, Jakob Fuglsang are approaching the victory. Two men battling it out. One's going to take the stage for sure. And they start doing that little cat and mouse of who's going to go, who's going to lead out, who's going to sacrifice, and potentially lose the race, thinking they've got it wrapped up. The third man on the road, Mikkel Kwiatkowski, catches Alaphilippe and Fuglsang, and then they kind of go, oh, oops, what have we done? Now it's a three-man race. They still cat and mouse slightly, but they really start up in that tempo and pushing for the line. Meanwhile, that peloton had quite a few riders in it. After recovering a little bit, Van der Poel starts pushing tempo. And one by one, he drops riders and drops riders and drops riders. And as the trio at the front approach the finish line, Van der Poel, who's pulled that peloton tooth and nail single-handedly, he's done 98-99% of the work, continues that ride, continues that push, and outraces the trio to the line and his peloton, who were getting the free ride that whole time, the ones who survived, and was just not only the strongest on the day, but also out-sprinted everybody and claims a hugely dramatic victory. The 14th seed, the legend of Abdelkader Zaf, in 1950 at the Tour de France, stage 13, it was an incredibly hot day. The North African Kader Zaf was in the breakaway, and they had a massive gap over the field, a good 30-minute lead. But under the conditions, And with rules being different in 1950 than they are today, someone handed Katerzaf a bottle. It was supposedly water. Thanks to his religion, Katerzaf was not a drinker, and the bottle was not water. And contained within the bottle, allegedly, was wine. After taking a few swigs of it and realizing what it was, he tosses it aside. But within about a minute, the effects began to hit his body. A person who never drank. B, a person who was under extreme duress, in crazy, intensely hot conditions, was hammered in about a minute from just a few drinks. He starts zigzagging back and forth across the road in flat terrain. He ends up forced off the road by a commissar, and he then lays down next to a tree and passes out. After some time, he is woken up, and he tries to get back on his bike, still having a slender lead over the peloton, though the fellow breakaway rider is long gone. He gets back on his bike and starts to ride down the road and continue on. Still drunk, though, he heads the wrong direction. Abdel Kaderzaf is then pulled off the road and picked up by the broom wagon, and his race is done. But it was an insanely... it was absolutely an insane moment and stuff of legends. That was the 1950 edition, the first time he would attend. In 1951, he would finish as the Lanterne Rouge, as in last place. Katerzaf definitely goes down as a legend, but Van der Poel's win is more legendary. Van der Poel, on to the next round. In our 7-10 matchup, we have Chloe Daiger in her 2019 World Individual Time Trial victory, crushing the field, winning by a minute and a half, against the number 10 seed, the 2002 Tour Down Under, Michael Rogers, impressive second place, and then going on to win the GC. Second place, not generally impressive by itself, but we'll talk about what makes it impressive in this one. So Chloe Daigert's victory came as a very, very strong time trialist, but up against a trio, and really more than trio, of Dutch riders who were incredibly impressive and very much the favored riders in that time trial. But Chloe Daiger rode hard and fast and had a lead at the end of the first sector that was impressive, and everybody was like, no, she's going to fade. It's going to happen. She's going too hard. And then at the end of the second sector, the same thing. She was out to an even larger gap. But they were saying, no, she's going too hard. She's going to fade. She's going to lose it. And she never did. She stayed sector after sector. The gap grew, and eventually Chloe Daiger won the Rainbow Bands by a full minute and a half. Super impressive. The 10 seed, Michael Rogers, in 2002, he had the virtual race lead, was at the front of the field in a small group when his derailleur broke. Gets off to the side of the road, takes a look at the bike, sees what's happened with the derailleur being broken, and he lifts the bike up into the air and slams it down onto the tarmac. Michael Rogers, the Australian, in his home race, it really mattered to him a lot. Right at the side of the road, right where he was located, just behind him, an Outback parked on the side of the road with a couple of spectators who had climbed out of that very Outback and were standing there watching him slamming the bike into the air. And this man, who is standing right behind Michael Rogers, in a matter of just a few seconds, goes behind the Outback, grabs his bike, his personal bike, out of the back quickly, puts the bike right in front of Michael Rogers, who just looks down, grabs the bike and hops on and rides off. It turns out that bike was an exact copy of Rogers' bike. The same brand, same tires, the same size frame, and roughly the exact same seat height. These guys were identical size. Rogers just about catches up, ends up taking second on the stage, but moves into the GC lead and wins the Tour Down Under. As impressive as Daigert's minute and a half win, that is an incredible story that, like some of these others that we've seen, is stuff of legend, but in this case, it had the type of outcome that is truly monumental. Michael Rogers takes the win on this one. On to the next round. And finally, in our 2:15 matchup, we have Stephen Roche in his 1987 Tour de France comeback victory against Chris Froome, also at the Tour de France, running up Mont Ventoux along his way to winning the Tour de France as well. Starting with the 15 seed, Chris Froome famously in a 3-man break, including Richie Porte, they get hit by the motorbike. The crowd was encroaching on the road way too far. They run out of space, and the motorbike crashes into the trio of riders, all three having some issues. Porte able to get going again ultimately, but Chris Froome, his bike is busted. It's completely broken, and with the mountain completely compacted and full of spectators everywhere, Froome frustratingly looking around going, I need a bike, I need a bike, I need a bike, what's going on, I need a bike. And as he's looking around for a bike, he turns around and starts walking up the Mont Ventoux, and still looking around going, I need a bike, I need a bike, I need a bike. He frantically starts to run up Mont Ventoux, entirely of the commissaires' fault, as it was one of their motorbikes that crashed into the group. He ends up being given the same time, and that was very controversial in terms of decisions, but it did preserve his chances to then go on and win that version of the Tour de France, one of his 4 career victories in the Tour. In that second seed, Stephen Roche. This one, tough story. It's a bit of a long one. Stephen Roche is coming off a Giro d'Italia victory, and he comes into the Tour de France still recovering, still shattered from his effort to win the Giro d'Italia. And so by stage 13, halfway through the Tour, he is 3.5 minutes down and well out of contention. But he's finally taking it easy through the first stages and not riding too hard and conserving energy where others were pushing. By stage 18, he's begun to cut that gap down. He's moved up through the order quite a bit. He's now just 2.5 minutes down overall. On stage 19, he claims second on the stage. The leader who had the yellow jersey punctured, lost time, and it ends up flipping, and you end up with Stephen Roche in the lead after 18 stages. There was 25 stages that year. The next day, stage 20, he ends up slipping back down to second place, and then on stage 21, he attacked too early, ended up being caught, and then was dropped, was 1.5 minutes down, and that was it. They let him go. He wasn't on the TV anymore. His race was done. But at the finish, surprisingly, seemingly out of nowhere, he had recovered. He had just about caught up. He ends up losing the stage by just 4 seconds. So he stays in contention. On stage 23, on the time trial, his strength, especially compared to his competitors, he ends up gaining 1 minute and picks up the yellow jersey to claim victory in that year's Tour de France. Froome, his moment is very controversial. Roche's is stuff of legends and a victory. Froome did not win on the day. So, Stephen Roche, on to the next round.
Alright, everybody. After that extra effort there at the end, I'm quite tired. Made it. Coming up on 20K for the day. I'll finish that one off, even if off camera. So I at least hit 20K, but good ride. And it really shows how far I've come. It's only 60 meters of climbing, but so much faster. I was easily averaging 30K per hour for most all of the ride, and often better. I'm moving way up the rankings from where I was, consistently about 40%, better than 40% of the riders, and that's a massive gain from where I was. So things are coming together a little bit. I'm definitely riding faster, smoother, longer. It's all come together. Recycling's March Madness. That's it for round number 1. I will leave a link to the bracket in the description below. Feel free to download that and complete your own so you can go along with what we're covering here. Next up, 2 days from now, we will have round number 2. And we'll cover the whole round in one episode, especially with the more streamlined version of it now. There's that 20K, so whew, got all the way through my water bottle as well. All right, everybody. I'm Decathlon Gamer. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Be safe out there. Bye for now.